to our team, our hosting team. So my name is Sarah Henderson. I work at Georgia Tech's VentureLab, which is also the National Science Foundation's I-Core South regional node. And what we do is we're basically a startup incubator for Georgia Tech startup entrepreneurial teams, and also teams from across the South as a part of our association with the National Science Foundation. And I have been with Georgia Tech's VentureLab for 2 years now. With me on the call today, I've got my colleagues, Melissa Heffner and Leah. Leah is our coordinator. She helps us run all these programs in our speaker series, and Melissa is my stunt double. We do a lot of the program development and the teaching, instruction, etc. So we're really excited to have you guys here. I want to talk to you briefly about the Female Founders Program specifically. Last fall, originally we were thinking about this idea pre-COVID. We just had this realization that even within our Georgia Tech population, there were a lot of really brilliant female STEM students on Georgia Tech's campus, but we weren't necessarily seeing that same ratio come into our startup programs. And we started to realize that, we wanted to change that. We wanted to fix that. And so we did some research, understood that in general, female-founded companies were not as well funded as male-founded companies. And they were typically, when they were funded, they were outperforming them. We also kind of, in this research that we were using to build up the case for why we should do a female founders program, we realized that again, they were not being well invested into, but they were in fact raising more money, and that it was really essential for us to start to think about how do we create a community of women supporting women, because part of it was that in many of the entrepreneurial programs on campus is, there weren't enough examples of female success stories, of female leaders, female coaches and mentors. So we wanted to create a cohort that was really dedicated to women supporting women and allowing our female founders to build community with other female leaders and female founders. So we started this accelerator startup boot camp called the Female Founders Program, and it's baked in the Lean Startup methodology. We invite teams from Georgia Tech, but we also invite community teams to join us for that program. We have one coming up in the fall. We run them about 3 to 4 times per year now. And then what we do is we coach our startup teams to really uncover who their customer is, what is the value that they're going to be creating with their product. We kind of expand from there. So when we invite teams into this program, like I said, it's not just university affiliated teams. We invite community teams as well. The real big criteria is just that it's being led. It's a team that is being led or co-led by a female entrepreneur. We're always welcoming of any other team members, but we want to see those female-led entrepreneurial endeavors. What we are hoping to provide teams as they come through our program is, again, just an opportunity for them to make connections with like-minded leaders, and to also take away key lessons on how to navigate the startup world and the startup journey. So like I mentioned, we do have a program coming up this fall. When I stop sharing my screen, I'll be sure to drop this link into our chat. We have an info session coming up this afternoon as well, later on around 4 o'clock. But this is the registration link for the actual form to apply for our program. It actually starts next week. So if you yourself are a female founder and know somebody who is, there's still time to apply, and we encourage you guys to go ahead and apply. We'd love to have you join. So one of the things we noticed at the end of our programs, especially since they've been virtual due to COVID, is that we were missing out on some of the community building, and we really wanted to expand and extend our community of female leaders and female entrepreneurs. And that was the impetus for us thinking about how do we create more networking opportunities, more growth opportunities for this community to kind of learn from each other and grow with each other. And that was the impetus for us beginning to do this monthly Female Founders Speaker Series, where we invite in women entrepreneurial success stories, and also women leaders who are experts in entrepreneurial topics. And so this month, we're bringing in Blanca Catalina Garcia from ATDC, and I'm gonna let her introduce herself because I'm sure she's going to give a more thorough introduction to what her background is in the startup arena and how she has really been able to push the envelope for creating equitable spaces. And we're very much looking forward to her conversation with us. So, with no further ado, we'll go ahead and stop sharing and allow Blanca to jump in.
Hi, thank you so much, Sarah. And it's that introduction is it's powerful because it really speaks to why we're all here. And I really hope that the conversation we have today encourages everyone to just feel like you can move forward on, whether it's you're thinking about doing a startup or if you're thinking about entrepreneurship or how do I commercialize my research or how do I find community of other women who are invested in innovation, in creating a whole new space for us, and that's what I'm calling our conversation today, making space. My name is Blanca Catalina Garcia. I have a couple of different hats that I wear. One that Sarah mentioned, I work as a catalyst, a startup catalyst at the Advanced Technology Development Center as part of our MBDA at ATDC program. So MBDA is a Minority Business Development Agency. And I will tell you more a little bit about what I'm doing. But today I wanted to talk about this idea of making space. And I talk about spaces and making space a lot. And a lot of times people will say to me, well, what does that even mean to make space? It is absolutely sort of that kind of jargon that people throw out that doesn't really have that much meaning unless we put some context around it. So I want to tell you a little bit about some of the experiences I've had over the last 5 years helping to build out the Atlanta tech startup, tech ecosystem, and why making space is so important to me. Oh, and I'm not sure if can I change I was able to do it before.
So, do you have sometimes if you have more than one presentation open, it can screw up the ability to move forward.
Okay, let me close out.
I've also just made you presenter, if that makes a difference.
That makes a difference. There you go. My little arrow is back.
Yes.
Thank
Awesome.
you very much. Thank you, Leah. Okay, so I want to talk about space in the way that Ayanna Pressley talks about space. If you don't know her, she's a congresswoman, and I would definitely check out her stuff. She's a really cool leader. I had the opportunity to meet her once. She doesn't know who I am, but she's somebody to me. And one of the things that she talks about is this idea of creating space. So a lot of times we'll hear that as we're entering spaces where technically we don't belong or we're the only one or what have you, this idea of like take up space. And I've absolutely received that feedback, take up space, Blanca. And I've given that feedback. Go ahead and take up space. But I love this idea of switching how we talk about that idea, because when we talk about occupying space or taking up space, it's almost like it speaks to this scarcity mindset that is so prevalent in so many of the places that we occupy in business, in academia. And if you think about scarcity mindset, this idea of like that there's only so much, imagine that it's like a pie, and it's like whatever place that we are in is some sort of pie, and that pie is sliced, and the more that it's sliced, the thinner the slices become, and so the more you want to hold on to your piece of the pie, because the more that it gets cut up, the less that you'll have, or maybe you will have nothing. And when we talk about creating space, it switches that mindset to abundance mindset, to this idea that we actually create what's there, that there is no such thing as the pie, that the pie is infinite, that we're the ones who create the pie. So I want to invite us to think about, as we're thinking about diversity in technology, diversity in entrepreneurship, as being, as our presence being one that expands that space, not that we're just taking up space, right? So I wanted to tell you a little bit about me. And I don't usually get to talk about myself in most of the conversations or presentations that I do, but I appreciated that invitation and was encouraged to tell a little bit about my story, because really stories are the most important way that we communicate with each other. So I'm originally from Chile. I was born in Chile, and I was there until I was about 5 years old. I was born in Santiago, which is a big city, but most of my younger childhood, I lived in Talca, which now is a big city, but at the time was like an agricultural center. It was fairly rural. We lived on a farm. And my dad had the opportunity to study in Cleveland, Ohio. And so we moved to Cleveland. And that was my first American experience. I learned English there, but I also uh, came to know some of the fundamental elements of the American experience. I was in a neighborhood that was incredibly diverse. There were people around me who were from all over different places, who practiced different religions. I had never experienced that. So it opened and expanded my mind. We moved back to Chile because that was the whole plan, but unfortunately that also coincided with the change over from the Pinochet government to what was going to come next. So there was a lot of, in particular, economic just unrest. It was essentially a big transition moment for Chile, and there was a lot of scarcity mindset thinking. A lot of people were holding on to whatever they had. There was a lot of movement, and so we were not in a position to stay. We were struggling, and the doctor who was overseeing the residency of my dad had come to respect him a lot, and he invited him to help him build out a clinic in Florida. So we had the opportunity to move back, and I can tell you that this is like a perfect picture of the women in my family. This is this really does. I mean, my sisters would be furious that I shared this with you all, because it really is a micro picture of what it was like for us when we were kids. Anyway, so we moved to Florida, but I can tell you by the time we moved to Florida, I was 12 years old, so I was almost a teenager, and we had moved so much. I'd been to 10 different schools by then. And I had not only been moving to different places, but also moving across continents. And so many of you can probably relate. I know this is not an uncommon experience. And that idea of the third culture kid, or feeling just kind of like, where do you belong? And I didn't belong anywhere, right? So that experience afforded me these incredible tools. The tools that come when you are an immigrant, when you navigate the world, when you're a global citizen, the opportunity to understand how to discern the code, the language of different groups of people, how to find entry points, how to find people that are just a little bit more receptive, those champions, those supporters that will open doors for you, so that you can break in as an outsider. So that allowed me to become an incredible bridge builder, and I've transferred those skills into my professional story. But the other side of that was that have always lived in the in between. In Chile, I'm the gringa to my family and my friends and my community there. And in the United States, I'm definitely an immigrant. I'm not exactly from here. So it's like, where do you belong? And it did force me to think about this thing of identity and belonging, and what did that actually mean? And I can honestly say that a lot of the sort of moving around that I've done in the work that I've done has been sort of my own personal journey of figuring out what is belonging, and how do we connect. And one of the things that really catapulted where I am now was sort of the discovery of what we now call the brave space, or building a brave space. But essentially all that is that at the time, I was somewhere, mid to the beginning of my career, and I had the opportunity to start working in community impact initiatives, educational impact initiatives. So there was like spaces where people would come together to learn something, right? And what I figured out was that if we had sort of an agreement in that space of how we treated each other and the openness that was there and the invitation to be vulnerable, and that's why I call it a brave space. We talk about safe spaces. Safe space is very hard to achieve most of the time, especially in a large group. Brave space is essentially speaking to that it does take a lot of courage to be vulnerable. But what I figured out is that if you can create that space effectively, and I did this in so many different environments. I did this with in community centers, in neighborhoods, with kids, with teenagers that were struggling. I did this with um, groups of professionals. It's very transferable. You create a space of learning in which the invitation is to be vulnerable, to redefine your identity, to leave away like that sort of the masks that we wear in order to like fit in and connect to whatever we identify or connect to, and sort of redefine who you are and what you want to do. And as a result, I saw transformation, not just in myself, but in the people that were in those spaces. And that really it helped me to understand that there was something foundationally human about moving towards change, that had to happen in the implementation. So like the nitty gritty to do operations of like creating change. Underneath that had to be this idea of like brave space and vulnerability and so on, which now we talk about. But at the time, I didn't even have words for it. So anywho, I arrived to Atlanta. I was not in the tech space. I was in the linguistics and intercultural industry, and I got invited. I was invited to be a part of this movement, and I was invited by some women who saw me and saw what I could bring to tech entrepreneurship for women and for women of color. And they invited me to the table. And that's significant. I'm going to talk about it later, but that it changed my life. So I joined an organization called Digital Undivided. Digital Undivided was an incubator nonprofit program focused on ideation stage, Black and Latina women-led tech companies. So it's all about this intersection of emerging tech startup and opening that door to women of color. And I really cut my teeth in this environment, in this industry, through Digital Undivided. I was invited to develop their mentor program, which I had a lot of experience before doing things like that. But they also invited me to help develop what we ended up calling the Confident Founders Program, which is still part of Digital Undivided today. And the whole idea of Confident Founders was to build like a leadership program or a leadership education development aspect to the incubator, recognizing that there was this additional layer that women, and in particular women of color, had to go through of like growth and adaptation and finding themselves and self-trust and all these things that I'll talk about in a minute. And that it was awesome to be a part of building that. Here I am with some of our Digital Undivided community, and actually some of these are technologists at MailChimp. This is one of our out in the world looking at what a startup turned into a company looks like. I also got the chance to work with Walker's Legacy, which is a nonprofit organization that does impact work in media for women of color entrepreneurs. I taught a couple of their accelerator programs. And then I was able to join an organization that's founded local here by Joey Womack, called Goody Nation. At the time, we were launching a program called the Intentionally Good Project, which was focused on diverse-led and social impact tech founders, and helping them to augment their social capital, build relationships, because we knew how important that was. We were able to expand and scale that program nationally. I'm very proud of the work I got to be a part of there at Goody Nation. And then this opportunity came up at the Advanced Technology Development Center, which is part of Georgia Tech, and it is an incubator program specifically for deep tech companies, but we also have a lot of programs for emerging tech founders. So if you are startup curious, tech curious, it's a space for that as well. And I actually have a position, I have a really unique position that I share this program with my counterpart, who's another startup catalyst and leader at Georgia Tech, Nakia Malesio. If you don't know him, look him up. And we lead this program called the MBDA at ATDC. And it's actually part of this project called the Business Growth Hub, which is a pilot project funded by the Minority Business Development Agency. That hub is focused on building better connections, collaborating better across ecosystems to support founders that are part of minoritized or marginalized communities, in particular BIPOC-led companies. And Nikki and I are part of the tech companies side of that. So that's what I'm doing now. But I also wanted to name some of the other organizations that I've gotten to partner with and work with. And just to say that there is such a rich community of supporters for entrepreneurs here in Atlanta. And I can tell you, 5 years ago when I started this work, it was kind of a desert. If you were a woman or a person of color, there was just not a lot of resources out there. It was very much emerging. And over the last few years, it's just incredible to see the growth. So it's out there, and it just goes to show that it just takes that investment, that you really want to do it as a community. And Atlanta now is known nationally, internationally as a center, as a tech hub, and in particular a tech hub for that supports diversity. So we definitely have the eyes of the world upon us, and have an opportunity to make a mark. So I wanted to share with you some of my learnings over these last few years doing this kind of impact work. What are the things that I've garnered from that? And I can tell you, and I was telling Leah before we jumped on this call, that initially I was just going to throw a bunch of statistics at you. Oh, this is how much VCs invest in Black founders and how much they invest in women of color founders, and what kind of loans these entrepreneurs are getting, and what access they have. And truthfully, what I want to share with you is more my story, and more of like the stories that I've been able to collect, and the reflections that I've been able to have in community with this founder community and these ecosystem builders that I've gotten to collaborate with. So the number one takeaway, over and over, this comes up again, is the path looks different. And I wanted to share this little graphic with you. So we would have these late night sessions, these tech building sessions over at Digital Undivided. And one of the founders brought this graphic once. Hey, let's look at this. And we looked at it for a while, and then we just had a good laugh. Because the reality is that there's so many aspects of this pathway when you think about, okay, how does a startup founder do this, right? So this is what that's talking about. How did the Instagram guys do this? And we just in that first line, I was like, I can't do that. There's so many ways that, like, as women, we are often the social and even economic center of our family and community groups. I know that I have found this to be true over and over again with the founders that I know. So for them, quitting their job means that the insurance that they're helping to pay for their kids, or the caretaking they're doing for their mom, it's just not in the cards. Or being able to go to a party, first of all, and a party in which there's investors, people who just have 10, 20, 50, $100,000 lying around to invest in somebody's idea. It just speaks to the fact that the things that we have access to and what is a realistic pathway into tech entrepreneurship is just really different. And what is laid out speaks to of the experience of men, the experience of people who have certain social privileges in our society, and we have to think about how do we do it. And we're so in the process of doing that, we're also redefining this pathway. So I want to go back to the reflections there. Oh, there we go. Okay, so one, I want to talk about network knowledge. When I was invited to Digital Undivided, I remember, okay, so the way the tagline for Digital Undivided is we help women own their work. And then we talked about like how we're supporting women of color entering the innovation economy. And the conversations that were presented to me by the women who were leading that initiative and the perspective that they had because they had somehow entered into that space, they had been they got into those communities, into those networks, they were going to those schools. And so they were hearing and understanding entrepreneurship framed in a way that I had never imagined. I mean, I grew up around entrepreneurship. I'm a Latina, for God's sakes. Like it's in our blood. My grandfather, escaped the Civil War in Spain and like became an entrepreneur in Chile, and like that's the story of like that side of my family. We're entrepreneurs. I had already built like a bunch of little businesses throughout my life. It had never occurred to me that it was something that could be that big, that impactful, or that it would somehow be, I guess what it was being framed to me is like a platform of like liberation and like self-ownership. What? And the reality was that the reason I didn't know that and didn't have contact with that framework is because that the network that I was in, they didn't see it that way. They didn't have access to that knowledge, that the type of access that you needed in order to even frame entrepreneurship in that way was not there. And as a matter of fact, the deeper I delved into it, and along with the community of founders that I was a part of, the more that my family community, the people around me really didn't know what the heck I was doing and felt that what I was doing was risky, one, and two, that it didn't make sense to them. They couldn't put legs around it. And that speaks to network knowledge. You don't know what you don't know. And so we all reside in these little circles, right? In which we understand the world in a certain way. We share a certain set of access points. We understand resources in a certain way. We define things in what's a threat, what isn't. How do you navigate that threat? All of that is in these networks of knowledge. And what I would argue is that most of us as women and as people of color have been on the outside circles of this. And so that is a huge struggle. And I'm going to speak to that in a minute. The other thing that I've taken away is that relationships matter. It's all about who believes in you. Access and credibility comes from being seen. So if you are solving a problem that is not a problem for the person who has the resources to support you in building that company, then it's impossible because they don't understand what that problem is because they don't see it in their life. How many times I've worked with founders, I've a couple of companies, this is real because you can read about this, but I've had a couple of companies that have built fintech companies and have gone to investment meetings and they have to explain what debt looks like for everybody else. Like they understand debt from like as a financial tool, but they couldn't understand why you would need to solve a problem around debt because they had never been in contact really viscerally with, say, having severe credit card debt or student loans. It's just outside of the realm of their experience. So if you have relationships and you build human to human relationships with a network of people that have the resources to support you, it makes all of the difference. And it's all about being seen. And then of course the other takeaway is the code. So much of what I do, especially with like emerging founders, is piecing through the language of the tech entrepreneurship world because it's just riddled with jargon as the business world is, as the research world is, and all of these are contextual definitions. So the reality is that if you don't have the language to frame what you're doing or what you're talking about, it's impossible to communicate why it's important and why they should buy into you and buy into that idea. So much of what I've done is doing what I did before, which was that intercultural translation piece that I'd grown up with, that was a big part of my early career, was totally transferable to this impact and tech entrepreneurship world. So I have some things I want to share for those of you who are here that are tech entrepreneurs or are curious about, I call you, when I say startup curious or entrepreneurship curious, some thoughts for you. And it's not what you would think. I could go through a presentation and say, you need to learn the business model canvas or pick up the mom test because customer discovery is key. But I will leave the team here for that. Y'all have that. We have some wonderful resources as well at ATDC, and there's wonderful programs that I get to be a part of. So I'll let the experts handle that. What I want to talk about is what does that feel like as a person? So one is be persistent. Don't give up. One, because, and I will share this thought that actually is not mine. It's a dear friend of mine, Kristen Daniels, who works in entrepreneurship, and she's done some incredible things, in particular entrepreneurship education for prison communities and in recidivism reduction. And she said to me, Blanca, we are trying to assimilate to things, to a picture of leadership or a picture of entrepreneurship that we only partially understand, for which we only have partial information. Back to that network knowledge thing, we're outside of it. So it's like, here's what a leader looks like to me from the outside. Here's what a tech company looks like to me. That looks like it would be successful. Let me go towards that. But the reality is that because we're not inside the networks in which those things are created, where the rules are created and shared, we are trying to fit into a mold that we don't completely understand. And then once you start to figure out what the rules are, then you realize that a lot of those things won't work for you, like I mentioned earlier. So you end up having to figure out a different way to do it. So it's a more circuitous road. One of the things I talk about all the time with my founders is, I know you didn't sign up for this. I know you didn't sign up for this. You signed up to build a health tech app. You signed up to solve, to create a marketplace for wellness. You're not signing up to, like, I don't know, pioneer the pathway for tech founders to come to build legacy. Not necessarily, right? Well, but that's what it is, because the path for us is not built yet. So we have to build it. The architect, what it looks like for us to be leaders. As mothers, as caretakers, as all the integral pieces of what it means to be a woman, to be diverse communities, the cultures that we bring in, our voice, how we frame the world. That's the picture of what success is. That doesn't include us yet. So we're making that as we go along. So it takes a long time. So how do I survive this thing that you're sharing with me, Blanca? Because it feels really overwhelming, right? Well, find your people. Find your people. This community that we have here, this is so powerful. Like I'm telling you, like it's so powerful. Go ahead, you can jump off the call, go find your people, because it is incredibly powerful to have a community of other people who are doing something like what you're doing, who are exploring the same questions. And there's a few ways this is powerful. One is that, like I said, as you're doing this, because the networks that many of us are in don't understand what it is, it's hard to be supported. I cannot tell you how often I have had a founder coming to me and saying, my husband's really fighting me on building this startup because it's taking a lot of my time and investment, and he doesn't understand why I would be doing this. Why am I risking our finances, our stability? Why I'm spending time away from our family? It feels selfish. And it's having other people, your sisterhood, your fellow, you're at that community that reminds you of why this is important and sees your vision and sees your valuable contribution. And often they trust you more than you trust yourself. We are just not represented enough in positions of leadership, in positions of 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 success, that and often what ends up happening is that we're breaking out of what the society at whole uh, defines us as. So this community projects back to us what we can potentially be, even beyond our own imagination. And then we get to live up to that. The other side of this is how many of you, I know this is the case, how many of you have been the only one? The only one in the only woman in your office, the only Black person in your lab, the only Latina in your department. I mean, we're constantly occupying the role of the only one. And you're never alone when you have that community with you. I think about that all the time when I'm in a meeting or I'm, you know, confronting a question, those questions that we get, the questioning that we get, and I can feel the legion of my supporters behind me. I'm never alone in that room. That community is powerful. It is your superpower. And then I want to talk about bringing your full self. Again, we talk about how the pathway is not built for us. We're building the path that works for us. We're creating that legacy. Well, within that, that when we think about fitting into, adapting into what is already there, let's face it, it asks us to fracture ourselves. We have to diminish pieces of who we really are in order to fit in, right? In order to show up as acceptable, as a leader, as being credible, right? The right voice. I can't tell you, like, as you can tell, I'm a touchy feeling person. I've gotten that feedback my whole life. Oh, Blanca, you speak too soft. You are way too touchy feely. You lead with your heart. Nobody's going to trust you that way. Nobody's going to make you a leader that way. They're not going to buy into you. And I call BS, because my whole self, this touchy feely artsy Chilena, Americana, whatever it is that I am the source of the valuable contribution that I bring to the world, to that expansion. And that source is sacred. You are your North Star. You'll hear this all the time. Investors, people who are supporting early stage founders, they're not as interested in your idea. You might be killing yourself over your idea. They're kind of like, okay, well, let's make sure it's viable, but they're looking to you. Why? Because we know that that person, the person who leads and brings forth that idea, is really the power behind that idea. And that idea sits in you, within your full self, everything, the complex women that you are. And so I encourage you to bring your full self, find ways to run your company where, you have a culture that is accepting of hybrid or remote work because it works for those who are mothers or caretakers. Like, these are the conversations that now people in the pandemic are like, we should be talking about this. And those of us are like, yeah, we've been making it work for you for a long time. And now we're going to make it work for all of us. When you expand the space, you create opportunity and space for everyone else. So I'm going to encourage you to think about what it means to bring your full self into this enterprise. I told you I was going to, you're expecting me to talk about business. I'm going to talk about this whole other thing. So those of us who want to show up. So there might be some people, I wanted to just acknowledge that there might be some people in our group today who maybe are, interested in entrepreneurship or the startup world, but that's not their bag. They are on another path, but you want to show up for those entrepreneurs. So the first thing I'm going to share is if you have the opportunity to open a door, start with checking your assumptions. All of us have internalized, I'm just going to say it, the systems of oppression that are part of our world. And so you really have to think long and hard. Is it that this person isn't up to par? Or is what are my expectations? So every time you're running into a situation where you're like, well, I could support this woman, well, I could support this Black woman founder, this entrepreneur, whatever, but I'm not sure, like, do they really have it together? Check yourself. Think about, what assumptions do you make about what is a leader? Think about what assumptions you make about what is a good idea. What part of those things are things that you have learned? What part of those things are also things that you have access to? A lot of times we measure somebody else's capacity or their potential based on where they've arrived or what they've accomplished or their efficacy based on our own experience. But all of us experience a certain, have access to certain privileges. And I know privilege right now is a very polemic political term, but I'm gonna flip that conversation and say that privilege is simply a penalty that you are not under. Yes, I'm a Latina immigrant, but I learned English when I was little, so I lost my accent just a few years after moving here the last time. Not having an accent as an immigrant affords me a lot of access. There are doors that are open to me that are not open to a person who is just as competent, creative, and amazing, because people can understand me a little bit better, because I have this tone and capacity to speak a language that sounds like an American, like a Native American. Look at my skin. I am very white, presenting. That also affords me a lot of access. And there's a myriad of things that I have access to that have allowed me to be here today with you. And so I have to check and consistently be aware of the fact that I've been able to reach certain points, not just because of my own performance, drive, ambition, capacity, but also because I have things that are out of my control that have opened doors for me. And sometimes we make the assumption that it's all us, and that's just, it's not fair. So check your assumptions. Then number two thing I would ask you to think about is that the door opens from the inside. The cool thing of the experience I shared with you about Digital Undivided was that it was a group of women of color who had gotten through, like, had gotten into the building, like past the lobby. And so what did they do? They opened the door. Hey, come on in. I'll show you how this works. Actually, it looks like this big room, but it's actually something else. These are the rules. You have the capacity to open the door. And I just want to emphasize that every single one of us has somewhere in the scope of our influence the ability to open doors. So open a door. You're the only one who can open a door. I hear often, they are not there. We tried to launch this program, but there's just no women that are interested in this. Oh, you know what? We did do a bunch of these interviews, but a lot of the Black founders are just not ready. That means and I will challenge that. I will die on that hill. Yes, they are there. They are there. You're just not looking in the right place. So we have the opportunity to look and see where we can make impact. Where do we move? Because the other side of that door is a brick wall. For many people, it's a brick wall. There's just no way in. And I've spent my whole life as an immigrant, as the story that I shared with you, looking for the back door or the opening in the fence or the window that might have opened. And that's great. It's great for survival, but it shouldn't be like that. And there have definitely been situations where it is absolutely a brick wall for me. And in that situation, it was women who saw me and who, like Beetlejuice, like drew a door in the wall and opened it for me. So I know I'm killing this metaphor, but I really want you to just think about that every time that you have that opportunity. Can I open a door here? Because it's within my scope of influence to open that door. We cannot leave it to the people that are outside to do that. A lot of times we do that. Oh, they're not there. Oh, that they're not ready. Are you checking your assumptions on that? Are you opening a door truly where that door needs to be open, or are you just leaving that obstacle there? And then again, just going back to this idea of like, how do we switch from the scarcity mindset to abundance? That change is expansive. I can guarantee you, wherever you are, or wherever you find yourself in this conversation, change is uncomfortable and painful. I've been through more changes than I can possibly imagine, and yet I still fear it. So I empathize with the idea of like, I don't like the changes unless I have to. But I want to invite you to think about change as expansion. A dear mentor of mine, who was one of the women who opened a door, said to me, Blanca, in order for a seedling to sprout and blossom, they have to break their seed, right? It's destruction. So change, yes, is painful because it's an act of destruction. But beyond that is this opportunity to expand, to see the world. And I'm saying this not just to those who are curious about entrepreneurship. I'm saying those who, for those who have the opportunity to support those entrepreneurs. It's expansive for all of us, and we can only really engage in this change if we come together and we're committed to that expansion, to that vision of a greater, of a bigger world than what is right now. I want to leave you with this thought because I think it's really important. I do believe that I am in a room full of not just allies or accomplices or whatever you want to call it, but also champions. Those of us, and every single one of us, even if we are women of color, we have the opportunity to be champions for someone else. But I want to share that I think it's that Tarana Burke makes a distinction that is important in this work, which is that we need to humanize this work. We need to humanize that kind of engagement. I think all of us want to be on the right side of history and we want to support each other. But for example, we're a group of women here, a diverse group of women. And so we share and have solidarity in what that means to be a woman, to identify as a woman in this world, and what the world dishes out to us as much as what it offers us. But many of us have different stories as to how we've arrived to where we've arrived. And those stories are significant. It cannot just be a single story. What this invitation is saying is go beyond, say, what you put on your Instagram and think about, how do I become part of this impact, this movement, this expansion for people to actually know? Ask them about their stories. Those human stories are significant, and that's the nuance that allows us to come in real solidarity, to create that brave space that really building diversity in technology and entrepreneurship is about. So thank you so much for letting me share my story with you. I would love to hear your questions. Really quickly, I wanted to share the Business Growth Hub site. There is a tab there to join us. There's no fee or anything. All we're doing is collecting the names of people who maybe are business people or supporters, or you're in an industry where you could potentially support an entrepreneur or entrepreneurship. And we are, as I mentioned, focused on founders of color. So if that's something that's interesting to you, we are looking at the full Southeast. It's not just Georgia, and it's a really exciting project. So I hope you'll become part of it. Of course, I work at ATDC. I'd love to meet any of you. If you are starting a business and you want to meet with me, I'm absolutely available. And then I also have my own consulting business where I actually help build brave spaces. So I help people build accelerators, incubators, educational programming that's focused on innovation or entrepreneurship, or just events. I help a lot of smaller organizations build experiences that are connective and transformative. And yes, thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing my emails. You can email me there. I'd love to hear from you. And if anyone has questions, I'd love to hear those as well. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's my honor and privilege to get to share my story with you all.
Blanca, thank you so much for that talk. I know that for many of us, you can see it in chat, it's a very resonating conversation. I want to give everybody on the call who may have a question just an opportunity to either share their question in chat or to collect their thoughts, because I'll pose you a quick one to kick us off, and then we can kind of go to the audience and see what's there. So a conversation that we often have with our teams when we talk about inclusivity and inclusive entrepreneurship is we kind of talk about three things we want to help them with. The first is awareness, right? Awareness of the systematic things they may end up facing. The next is sort of how to navigate that, right? And how we can give them the right tools and thinking for how to navigate that in their startup journey and for their entrepreneurial success. And the last is, which you've hit on quite a bit here, is this idea of disruption, right? How do we, and maybe disruption's not the right word or the word you might choose, but creating the path that doesn't necessarily exist yet for us.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm curious to hear your thoughts on is sometimes what our female founders or our underserved founders are dealing with is what happens when my goals as a founder, as an entrepreneur, and my need to sort of play in the existing, on the existing field, um, is in direct contradiction with my interest in disrupting that field. What do I do when I'm sort of faced with that conflict of, do I play by the rules that are there to see the success of my own startup? Or do I sort of honor this other conversation of creating that new path?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's very real. So I would pose that one, why would what so for any of you who if that question resonates, that you've been in those shoes, I ask you, why do you have to be alone in this? Don't be alone in it. That's why, one, your communities, the communities that you've built, those relationships that you built, the network of other female founders who are confronting a lot of the same stuff, that's why they're so important. Every single time. When you guys invited me to this talk, I went to my peeps. Hey, I gotta talk about this. How should I talk about it? I don't even bother trying to answer that question by myself anymore. I share it. We share it together, especially with this. It should be a shared burden. We come together and we ideate together to figure out how to navigate that, because the answer is going to be different depending on the circumstance, but you don't have to carry that burden. And the other side of that is that I encourage, speaking to the founders specifically, is to make the relationship of your champions as in advocates within that space. So the people who are on the playing field, that also have some authority and leadership, find those connectors. Like I said, relationships matter, because a lot of times they will also have a significant perspective. You might have to play by the rules in that moment because you're looking at it at the long as a long game. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So how do I figure out this situation, and knowing, leveraging their knowledge and their capacity within that space to figure out how to confront that. That's what I would say to them.
Thank you for that. It's often a discussion we try to facilitate, because it is a challenging situation that many of our startup teams find themselves in. I want to open it up to the audience to see if there are other questions or comments that anybody would like to make in our last few minutes here.
I do.
Go
Hi,
ahead, Chrissy.
Blanca. My
Hi,
name
Chrissy.
my name's Chrissy. I'm an Indian American. I'm a first generation from my family. Your message about, you know, the op the benefits you have from presenting more mainstream, I can relate to, because I look different from my mother, and the experience for her was much different than it is for me, and I can see the opportunities and the privilege that I have. You talked about creating opportunities and opening doors. I'm working on a tech startup right now. As you're in the early stages of, starting a business, how do you create those opportunities for folks who might not have those just yet?
Yeah, so in the early stages, you've got a lot of challenges on your plate. And so most of your bandwidth is going to be focused on what you're building, right? I
Yeah.
would say the way that you're opening doors, so there's a couple of different ways that just come to mind immediately. One, Share however you share. Some people love to post on all of their social media. Some people just talk to their friends or their network of supporters and just share your journey because you are opening and expanding, how they understand the world by doing that. So that's one way. And I think what ends up happening a lot of times is that people don't know how to support us as we're sharing more specifically what we're going through step by step. It allows for those around us who maybe have have like a specific question or have some that they don't know how to pinpoint because they don't really understand what it is that you're doing. They can like identify, oh, okay, so like that's a different way to look at how I could say make relationships professionally or it that so for me I've found that that's the not just for my own story but watching other founders and having them share their story has been really significant in creating opening doors. And maybe what ends up happening is that someone else becomes an entrepreneur, but what you might spark is like, let me approach leadership differently, or maybe I want to do some entrepreneurship, maybe I want to do some creative movement within my profession because you're modeling that.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. That's very helpful and actionable steps that we can take right now.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Chrissy, and thank you, Blanca. I know some people are dropping off, so I just wanted to quickly mention, we do have another speaker series will happen on September 23rd. And if you'd like any information about that, please feel free to email us. I'll drop my email into the chat. Same goes for if anybody would like the recording or the presentation from today, please feel free to email us and we'll be happy to share that. But I want to see if there's, Blanca, do you have a few more minutes? Could you take one or two more questions if there are any?
I'm happy to, yes.
Okay. Does there anybody else that would like to make a comment or have a question for Blanca? Getting lots of thank yous.
See, Marcia, you're raising your hand.
Marcia, yeah?
Marcy,
Marcy, sorry.
do you coordinate or do you know Ashoka?
That sounds really familiar. But
Ashoka
no.
is apparently the largest network of social entrepreneurs. They're based out of I think it's Virginia, right near DC.
Okay.
And they have a huge network of entrepreneurs, and people are asked to be like a fellow of the network, and then they apparently have access to a lot of resources.
Yep. Cool. Thank you so much. Is it Marcy or
Marcia.
Marcia? Hi, Marcia. Okay, you pronounce it in
Marcia.
Spanish.
Well, I'm in
Yeah.
Spain right now.
Muy bonito. I see all the beautiful
En un
background.
pueblecito precioso.
Yes. Muchas gracias, Marcia. Yes, I have heard of Ashoka, but I've never connected with them. Thank you for sparking that
Look
thought.
them up. My daughter worked with them, but in the Changemaker school department or area.
Cool.
But they also get all these social entrepreneurs also to coordinate with their Changemaker schools, and they teach these little kids from a very small age how to be change makers.
I love it. Yeah, I love
Very
it.
interesting.
Yeah, and the entrepreneur, that idea of like change makers and the entrepreneur mindset. We could have a whole other conversation about why that's so valuable for anybody, whether or not you are going to be an entrepreneur. So,
Absolutely. Totally agree with that, Blanca and Marcia. We teach the lean startup methodology to startup teams, but we also bring it to, entrepreneurial teams, researchers, anybody that wants to think in that way and from that perspective. If anybody else would like to ask questions, please feel free. I'm going to say, please email us or email Blanca directly if you have any follow-on questions. But just to be respectful of everyone's time, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap for today. So Blanca, again, we just wanted to thank you tremendously for joining us today. It has been just a very intriguing conversation, and one that I think has resonated certainly with our team at VentureLab, and it looks to have resonated with many of our audience members here today. So thank you so much for giving us food for thought and things to ponder and take back with us in our days ahead. And we really appreciate you joining us. We're looking forward to continuing to build the community together and continuing the conversation.
Yes, thank you for creating this space, and thank you for inviting me. It's my pleasure, my honor to be here.
Thank you. And thank you to all of our participants. We hope that you will join us next month as well. We will have Sammy Hansen, who is a GT alum and has been creating a startup called MedSure,
Cool.
where she is working on, I'm going to call it femtech, for lack of a better way of describing it, but she is working on a variety of different products that address concerns related to women and women's health and women's reproductive health. So we look forward to you guys joining us next month.
Yeah, familiar with that company. That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Blanca, thank you again. We really appreciate you joining us.
It's my pleasure, really. Thank you so much. This is wonderful. It's a great opportunity, and it's so good to see all the different comments, and I'm glad that it resonated. I hope it wasn't too touchy-feely.
I don't know why we would worry about that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I have definitely been in like talks like these that I've decided to go that direction, and then I've had some entrepreneurs come up to me and be like, "That's not what I expected." But without fail, somewhere a few weeks later, months later, they'll be like, "You know, you were talking about that idea of relationships, and I kind of took that